Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm going to tell you the story of how two of the most powerful empires of the 19th century almost went to war. Over a pig. Yes, a pig. But before you laugh, let me assure you, this pig nearly triggered a full-scale war between the United States and the British Empire. And if things had gone slightly differently, North America's map today might look very different. Let's rewind. After the American Revolution, the Treaty of Paris in 1783 officially ended the war between Britain and the newly formed United States. Borders were drawn, lines were written. Everyone shook hands. On paper, everything looked neat and civilized. But there was a small problem. The people drawing those lines had probably never visited the Pacific Northwest. Fast forward to the War of 1812. Another conflict, another treaty, the Treaty of Ghent. Once again, the border question in the Pacific Northwest was politely ignored. Instead of clearly defining who owned what, both sides agreed to joint occupation of the region. A joint occupation sounds very diplomatic, very mature, very peaceful. In reality, it means we both claim it and we'll pretend not to fight over it for now. The real confusion centered around the waters near Vancouver Island. The treaty said the border would follow the middle of the channel. But here's the catch. There wasn't just one channel. There were multiple navigable channels. So which one? The Americans said. The Haro Strait, the British said. The Rosario Strait. Between these channels sat a group of islands called the San Juan Islands. Beautiful, strategic, and sitting right in the middle of imperial ego. Now add ideology into the mix. In the mid-1800s, the United States was deeply influenced by something called manifest destiny. The belief that Americans were divinely destined to expand across the entire continent, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Not just politically destined, spiritually destined. God-approved expansion. Meanwhile, Britain wasn't obsessed with destiny. Britain was obsessed with business, specifically beavers. Through the powerful Hudson's Bay Company, the British were making serious money from the fur trade. Beaver pelts were gold in the fashion industry of Europe, and the Pacific Northwest was full of them. So you had one side driven by divine expansion, and the other driven by fashionable beaver hats. And in the middle, a few islands, some settlers, and eventually, one very unlucky pig. By the 1850s, American settlers had begun moving on to San Juan Island. The British Hudson's Bay Company already had sheep farms there. Technically, both sides believed they had the right to be there because of the joint occupation. Now imagine living next door to someone who thinks your house might actually belong to them. Tension was inevitable. On June 15, 1859, an American farmer named Lyman Cutler found a pig rooting through his potato patch. This pig belonged to Charles Griffin, an Irish employee of the Hudson's Bay Company. Cutler was angry. Potatoes were survival. Warned Griffin before about the pig trespassing. This time he snapped. Shot the pig. That's it. That's the spark. Now, in a normal world, you compensate your neighbor, apologize for the pig, maybe argue a bit, end of story. But this wasn't normal neighbors. This was the United States and the British Empire. Griffin demanded compensation, reportedly $100. Cutler offered $10. Griffin refused. Suddenly, what started as a potato dispute became an international incident. British authorities threatened to arrest Cutler. American settlers panicked and called for military protection. Enter General William S. Harney. Now, Harney was not exactly known for subtle diplomacy. He was controversial, aggressive, and had a reputation for overreacting. When he heard that British authorities might arrest an American citizen, he decided to act decisively, very decisively. He sent 66 American soldiers to occupy San Juan Island. They're over a pig. From Britain's perspective, this looked like invasion. The Royal Navy responded by sending warships into the surrounding waters. Massive, intimidating ships armed with cannons. At one point, 5 British warships with over 2,000 troops faced fewer than 500 American soldiers on the island. Imagine the absurdity. 2 global powers, cannons aimed, soldiers ready. It's all because a pig had poor judgment about potatoes. The situation could have escalated into open war at any moment. One nervous soldier. One accidental shot. One misunderstood order and history changes. But here's where the story shifts from comedy to maturity. British Rear Admiral Robert L. Baynes arrived and assessed the situation. He was asked whether he would land British troops and remove the Americans by force. His response was calm and brilliant. He reportedly refused to involve two great nations in a war over a squabble about a pig. That single decision may have prevented bloodshed. On the American side, President James Buchanan realized things were getting dangerously ridiculous. He sent General Winfield Scott, a seasoned diplomat and experienced negotiator, to de-escalate the crisis. Scott arrived and negotiated a compromise. Instead of fighting, both sides agreed to a temporary joint military occupation of the island. Not joint civilian occupation. Joint military occupation. British and American soldiers lived side by side on the same island. Different camps, different flags, same soil. And remarkably, no shots were fired. For 12 years, yes, 12 years of peaceful coexistence under military tension, the only casualty of the entire conflict. The pig. Eventually, both nations agreed to submit the dispute to international arbitration. And here's another fascinating twist. They chose the German Empire to decide. In 1872, Kaiser Wilhelm I's Arbitration Commission reviewed the arguments and maps. The decision? The San Juan Islands would belong to the United States. On November 25, 1872, the last British troops left the island peacefully. No war, no massacre, no dramatic naval battle. Just diplomacy. Now, let's pause for a second. This story sounds humorous, almost cartoonish, but look deeper. This was a time when wars were common. Empires clashed regularly. Pride mattered. Honor mattered. Yet in this case, cooler heads prevailed. Admiral Baynes chose restraint over aggression. Winfield Scott chose negotiation over escalation. Two powerful nations stepped back from the edge, and here's the real lesson. Conflicts rarely start because of something truly big. They start small. An insult, a misunderstanding, a boundary not clearly defined, a pig in a potato field. But what determines history is not the spark, it's the response. The Pig War, as it later became known, is one of the few military standoffs in history where nobody died in battle. It proved that diplomacy is sometimes stronger than cannons, and it quietly shaped the peaceful border that today exists between the United States and Canada, the longest undefended border in the world. Think about that. The same region that almost erupted into war over a pig is now a symbol of stable coexistence.